She turned to the stove where a few pots were steaming. She lifted the lid on a pot and began to stir the contents with a wooden spoon. "How long it take Ju to fix house?" Mama asked as she tasted the sauce and then added additional spice. "I'm not sure, maybe 4 months with Lucia's help," I replied, wishing I knew where this was going. "After it done, Ju leave?" Mama asked. I cringed. This is the part one had been ignoring. The part one hoped would solve itself, although I knew it couldn't. I was thankful she was watching the pots and not my face. "Yes," I answered, not wanting to elaborate. It wasn't like I had a choice in the matter. "You leave my Lucia?" Mama didn't hesitate with the follow-up. I could hear the concern in her voice. There was a tenseness about her stance. "Yes," I said quietly. For some reason, lying didn't even occur to me. Mama's shoulders slumped, and she turned back to me. "Lucia not dressed like this for nobody," Mama whispered, wagging the spoon at me. "She never bring nobody to see me." My heart felt thick. Everything had already spiraled out of control, and I just didn't see it coming. "Ju tell her soon." "Okay." The anguish was overpowering. "I'll try," I whispered back. I think Mama saw my pain and her face went all confused. "Why'd you leave if you feel like that?" Mama asked. God, the woman could read my mind. I had no response to offer her. Nothing I wished to share. I also couldn't lie. "I have to," I stated firmly. "It's not something I have any control over." Mama gave me a strange look and then her face firmed up. She thought about it a moment, then nodded her head. "Ju tell her nice, no mean," Mama whispered. "The spoon's still ready. In your own time." At least I could promise her that. I was about to agree when she poked her head out of the kitchen and yelled down the hall, "Lucia, tell Jur Aunt call back. Ju have guest here." I guess agreement was a foregone conclusion. The dinner was a very cordial affair. Lucia was all smiles and Mama seemed to love seeing Lucia happy. The food was excellent, a Mexican-influenced sausage medley with some really tasty brown rice. Mama seemed overjoyed when I had 3 helpings. I thought I was being a pig. It's just that you don't know when you will get food like that again. I had to excuse myself, after dessert, to use the bathroom. When I returned, Lucia's face was glowing. They had obviously been talking about something, quite possibly me. I tried to get a hint from Mama's face, but it was unreadable. I let it go, since neither decided to include me in the discussion. When we left, Mama hugged me away from Lucia. "Ju be nice," she whispered and kissed my cheek. I nodded, moved to the car, and again made sure I opened the door for Lucia. I had dug a deep hole. I realized that now. Lucia's smile was making me dig it deeper. "Mama likes you," Lucia said proudly. "She thinks you're honest and a good person." I already told her that, but now she believes me. I felt my stomach turn over. I grinned at the compliment and struggled for a new topic. "Your mother sure can cook," I chimed in with a slight change in topic. That sausage thing was something else. I don't think I've had anything like it before. "What did Mama want to talk to you about?" Lucia asked curiously. I guess the phone call didn't fool her. "She was just looking out for you." I squirmed away from the truth. Lucia smiled and accepted it on face value. "So, did you like her?" Lucia asked. "Absolutely, she's wonderful," I said honestly. Lucia beamed, and I realized I just dug myself in a little deeper. I think I had just reached some important milestone for Lucia. I pulled into my driveway apprehensively. Mama was right. I had to tell Lucia. I wasn't sure when, and she was way too happy to tell her tonight. Maybe in a day or two, when the euphoria wore down a bit. I stepped out of the car and Lucia waited, smiling, for me to open the door. I of course did. She looked incredible and so alive. I wish things were different. Of course, if they were, I would be in bed waiting to wake up to another week of my old shitty job. She moved toward me when I closed the car door. "I want to spend the night," Lucia said warmly. I wanted to say yes so badly it hurt. I thought about how deep I was in already and knew her staying was the worst idea ever. "I only have a mattress on the floor, and it's not really that comfortable," I said, trying to discourage her. I prayed she would take the hint. "I want to spend the night," Lucia repeated with that deadly smile. I took a deep breath and let it out. She ran her hand lightly along the side of my face. "I'm not really ready for a relationship," I stated weakly. Lucia brightened her smile and kissed my lips. They were as soft as I remembered. Like an idiot, I kissed her back. "Just tonight," Lucia whispered. "No commitment, just tonight." I caved as she kissed me again. I wrapped her in my arms and let her false logic steer my thoughts. Once I had let go, I was gone. The rest of the world disappeared, and there was only this incredibly beautiful woman and me floating through time. Lucia giggled and grabbed my hand. We practically ran to the dining room, or where the dining room will be when the work was done. Now it housed my mattress and 2 suitcases full of clothes. It was the only room with curtains. Lucia grabbed the few candles I hadn't used since the power came on. She placed them around the room and I followed behind, lighting them. We doused the 60 watt in the ceiling, and suddenly the room had atmosphere. Lucia, unceremoniously, began undressing. I followed suit, kicking off my shoes and lifting the shirt over my head. She laughingly threw her bra at me. I fell over trying to catch it while pulling my leg out of my pants at the same time. I stopped undressing as our lips merged and passion took over. I rolled Lucia on her back and smothered her neck with kisses. I moved quickly, since she seemed to be in a hurry. I lifted my head with a proud smile. Lucia, laughing, was pushing her skirt down her legs. "Absolutely gorgeous," I complimented as I drank in Lucia. "Yes," Lucia moaned. Her hands left my head, and she spread her legs farther apart. Her movement slowed for the first time since we had left the car. "Wonderful," Lucia sighed. I looked up to see her smiling in the candlelight. All her intensity faded away. She guided me along her body and kissed me deeply. "I like you more than you want," Lucia said without warning, her smile trying to make light of the statement. I said nothing, which in and of itself was a lie. She must have seen the trauma in my face. Her smile disappeared, and she kissed me deeply as she rolled me on my back. "It's okay," she said softly as she mounted me. I climaxed in a slow mixture of pain and passion. Lucia held me as I hated myself for loving her. I awoke late the next day, much later than late. The sun was already high in the sky, and I heard a drill in the basement. I quickly threw on a pair of jeans and t-shirt, noticing Lucia was already gone. I followed the noise down the rickety stairs and into the basement. Lucia was handing a copper pipe to tall, thin guy wearing overalls. She smiled seeing me coming down. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Lucia called as the plumber relieved her of the pipe. I smiled back, half-heartedly. "Tom wants to trench a new line from the main," she said, pointing at the plumber. "It looks like someone ran a thin plastic line in a few years back," Tom said while pushing the copper through the hole he just drilled. "It's no longer code and will only cause you problems in the future. I can trench and lay a new one tomorrow. I don't think we could get the new meter without doing that." "Do it," I said, nodding to Lucia. She looked like she was having fun. I was happy to see she had fully encased her jugs today. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and saw it was 10:30. "Shit. I tried to wake you, but you were pretty beat," Lucia said with a wink the plumber didn't see. I smiled, pretending to see the humor. Sleepiness wasn't supposed to happen until later. I let it slide. Maybe it would be like the headaches and be infrequent. We spent the day assisting Tom. We were both invested in seeing a hot water heater got turned on as soon as possible. It turned out Tom was an excellent choice. His brother was the water inspector for the county. That meant there would be minimal delays between installation and inspection. We opened some walls to run piping to the second floor and replaced the old pipes to the first floor. It was dark when we stopped and Tom left, saying he would be back early in the morning with a backhoe. Lucia spent that night and the next with me again. I hid the truth and shared my passion. My hole was so deep, there was no ladder long enough to allow me to climb out. I made her no promises, but she inferred a lot and I had stopped dissuading. It was Friday when the pain in my head returned with a vengeance. I left that afternoon, lying to Lucia about having to go to the bank. I, instead, went to the hospital. There was a hospice care unit with a counselor who was recommended to me. I was lost, and I had to speak to someone. For the first time in my life, I needed to confide and seek advice. Someone who understood at least part of what was happening. "So, she doesn't know?" Dr. Collins clarified. He had hair that was a little too dark and a little too full for his age. I suspected he might be a little vain. No, and I am afraid my symptoms are getting worse, I said, trying to give him the whole picture. He looked down at the copy of my file the previous doctor sent. Think about what would happen if you don't wake up one day, Dr. Collins said. She finds you, not knowing why. Think how she will feel when she finds out. He paused a moment to let that sink in. You were dealt a shitty hand, Todd. Luckily, you have time to choose how you want to finish, but you aren't letting her choose at all. I know, I stammered. I need to know how to tell her. It hurts just thinking about it. I wish there was an easy way, the doctor said. We can do it for you if you ask, although that rarely works out well. There will be tears and anger, that I can promise you. You will have to be blunt, or she will think you are joking. No one sees this coming. I closed my eyes, knowing I couldn't let this go on much longer. I came here to build my nerve. Experts had a way of solidifying what needed to be done. I came away with no new knowledge, only becoming more resolute about what had to be done. I had already screwed up trying to keep Lucia at arm's length. Now I had to pay the price. It was going to be very expensive. Dr. Collins was showing me out the door, trying to remain supportive. It was his job, and he was good at it. Camilla, I'm finished for the day, the doctor said pleasantly to the cleaning lady who was waiting outside the offices. I recognized the responding voice immediately, and I nearly vomited as she turned. I would have rather died 5 minutes ago. Todd, what? Mama's eyes were flashing between Dr. Collins and me. I couldn't speak. I had no words. Dr. Collins quickly assessed part of what was happening. Camilla, there are privacy concerns here, the doctor stated clearly. I assumed I had just put her job at risk. Now I was screwing up a whole family. This what Juno can control? Mama yelled, ignoring the doctor and pointing at the hospice sign on his door. I saw her eyes straining, a mix of anger and fear. Camilla, we don't... I cut off the doctor. I was in so deep, I might as well pull the dirt on top of me. Lucia's mother, I informed the doctor quietly. His eyes went wide and I saw a mixture of concern and compassion as he shifted his look between Mama and me. Use my office, the doctor judiciously offered. He held the door open and I entered, praying Mama wouldn't follow. God didn't listen and I heard the door close. Painfully, I turned to face Mama. There were tears streaming down her cheeks. She love you, Mama choked out. She know you maybe not stay, but she not know why. Mama held back a sob. She thinks she changed your mind. This tear her heart away. Mama fell apart in front of me. I did the only thing I could do. I held her and tried to remain strong. It was hopeless. I'm sorry, I quietly apologized. I wasn't strong enough to stop it. I kept putting it off and it only got worse. I wish I never walked into that club. Mama broke out of my arms. No, Mama stated firmly. She not dance no more. It was firm in Mama's mind, something that would never change. She not owe that lady money. Jew did that. Never Jew take back. Mama wiped her eyes. She better off even if God call you. She was nodding her head as she wrapped her mind around the problem. She raised up on her toes and kissed my cheek. Jew tell her, today or I am. It wasn't a threat. It was a mother protecting her child. I responded the only way I could. Yes, Mama, I answered. My stomach was already doing flip-flops in response to the task. Go, Mama instructed. I have office to clean and I think better when I clean. It was an awful ride home. Incredibly too short. One time, at 14, my parents had left me home alone for the weekend. Like a typical young man, I tried to impress a girl by taking her for a ride in my mother's car. Inevitably, I smashed in the front quarter panel while attempting to park. No license and no way to explain how I knew where they hid the keys. Until this day, I had thought waiting for them to get home was the worst moment in my life. I knew now that episode was a cakewalk. Lucia was humming to herself as she repaired the plaster in what would become the family room. We were working from room to room, repairing the necessary damage done by the new wiring and plumbing. I hated that she was so happy. I was breathing heavily as I entered the room. My pulse was through the roof. Have fun at the bank? Lucia asked naively. The lies were done. Only pain was left. I lied. I didn't go to the bank, I responded, trying to remain calm and level. I thought I might throw up. Lucia paused her plastering for a moment, not looking at me. "Oh," Lucia responded after a second. She returned to her repairs. I sensed she wasn't sure if she wanted to hear more. I guess I wasn't as calm and level as I thought. "I saw your mama at the hospital," I said, inching forward. I was stalling again and hated myself for it. "You visited Mama?" Lucia asked. She still wasn't looking at me, and the plastering was getting quicker and sloppier. I sucked it up, and out it came. "I have a tumor," I stated bluntly. "I've known for a while. It's incurable, 6 months, maybe a year." I no longer wanted to vomit. I wanted to shoot myself. Lucia just kept plastering, never turning to look at me. She was plastering over what was already done. "Lucia?" I pleaded. When Lucia turned, I thought I would die. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. She dropped her trowel, the mud pan, and ran. I didn't have the heart to chase after. I heard her pickup start and leave at a high speed. I closed my eyes and prayed she would find her way safely to Mama. I no longer wanted the house or my 6 months. I called Mama. "She left," I said quickly. "I don't think she's coming back." "I'm sorry, Todd," Mama said. "I'm so sorry." I knew what she meant. She was sorry for everything I had just lost. I hung up the phone, never saying goodbye. I was back to knowing no one. I could always pay Dr. Collins for another hour. I could talk end of life at $100 an hour. Screw me. I yelled at the world. I returned to a dream I no longer cared about. At least it had an end game. Tasks that needed doing. Something is better than nothing. I picked up the trowel, mud pan, and went to work. I didn't sleep that night, but all the rooms were repaired. My heart was hurting when the sun came up. I packed away the plaster and cleaned the tools. Everywhere I went in the house, I kept expecting to see Lucia humming away. I distracted myself by calling a window company. The leech was at the house 2 hours later. I had a friend until I handed him the check. It was pitiful how I hemmed and hawed and stalled about models and quantities. I ended up picking the wood-framed, double-hung windows. What did I care about long-term maintenance? They looked the best and went with the character of the house. My new buddy, Frank, went around measuring. He promised that all except the bathroom windows would be replaced on Monday. The bathroom windows were an odd dimension and required special milling. I handed Frank my check and away went my newest friend. I spent the day painting the porch. I decided, actually it was Lucia's suggestion. The uprights needed a lighter color than the rest of the exterior. When I was done, I realized I had added even more of her to the house. She was right. More character and more charming. God, I missed her. I spent Sunday tearing out the old kitchen floor. Someone, long ago, had installed some type of linoleum that had long since yellowed, and they had used copious amounts of glue. I ended up replacing the plywood flooring. Strangely, I couldn't match the thickness of the old boards, so none of them could be saved. I put the tile sample that Lucia had picked on the floor. I measured the floor and decided to pick up the tiles on Tuesday. Lucia would own the kitchen as well. I slept that night. It was the pounding that woke me the next morning. I looked at my phone. It was almost 10 o'clock. Damn, I had overslept again. I realized the window company installers must be frantic. I quickly dressed and headed to the door. I was surprised to see them already in the house. One guy was pounding on a shim while checking a level, while another window was being hoisted in place by another worker. I thought I must have left the door unlocked. The workers nodded at me, but basically ignored my confused look. I headed out the door, looking for the supervisor. The supervisor was at the back of his truck, arguing with prettiest sight in the world. I stood stunned as Lucia refused 2 of the windows. The seals had already been compromised, and there was no way they were going in the house. I stared as the supervisor gave in and placed them back on the truck, promising new ones when the bathroom windows came in at the end of the week. Lucia saw me then, standing on her porch. Her face was questioning. I smiled and the world lit up with hers. She walked up to me as I stood stupidly, trying to figure out what it meant for her to be here. "I want the year," Lucia said. I closed the distance and pulled her to me. "It's already yours," I said. We kissed under a deluge of whistles from the installers. They would never understand what Lucia had given me. Her heart was more valuable than 100 homes, more precious than a full life. She was my happiness, and I prayed I could be hers. "I need to speak with Dr. Collins," Lucia said softly. combing her fingers through my hair. I loved her touch. I loved her just being here. He won't talk to me without your permission. I'll tell you anything you want to know, I said hesitantly. I was not enamored with the idea, but I couldn't hide anything anymore. She smiled at me. I would jump off a cliff for that smile. I need to know everything, even the bad parts you won't tell me, Lucia said carefully. I felt like the supervisor putting the windows back on the truck. It was a one-sided negotiation, and the only way to win was to surrender. I conceded. I sat down on the steps and called Dr. Collins' office. Lucia was a designer possessed. For an ex-stripper, she had a commanding sense of style. If I had my way, I would have painted the whole interior one neutral color. I thought back to that first night at the Pleasure Palace, when I desired one thing, and she slowly turned it into what I really needed. Why this woman wasn't commanding armies of thralls, I had no idea. I simply followed her around the house as she chose colors. I nodded my agreement, writing down her decisions and taping small paper paint samples to the text. There was little doubt she would own every room. That night, Lucia surrendered to me. I made love to her at my speed, the way I desired, and she simply enjoyed it. I was slow and methodical, memorizing every square inch of her by touch. Her smells, her sounds, her passion, and that lovely smile were mine. I fully lost myself that night. She and I became us, and us became everything. Surprisingly, I woke before Lucia the next morning. I watched her sleep with her thick hair bunched up in odd directions. It was incredibly peaceful watching her chest slowly rise and fall with every breath. I was guilty of allowing her to watch me die. It was so incredibly selfish. She was the love of my short, remaining life. I sneaked slowly out of bed, trying to let her sleep. I dressed quietly and headed to the kitchen. I grabbed the coffee carafe and filled it with water from the bathroom. I really had to get cabinets and a sink in the kitchen. I smiled to myself as I started the coffee machine on the plywood floor. So much still needed to be done, and I really didn't care if it ever got finished. The doing was more important than the finishing. As long as Lucia was here, I never wanted it finished. I loved working with her, and finishing would end that. I wanted what we had now to be my forever. I was so damn selfish. That smells wonderful, a sleepy voice said from the doorway. I looked up from my seat on the unfinished floor. Lucia was leaning on the door frame, the weak morning sun just breaking through the window to her left. Her hair was an utter mess, and her smile was subtle. "You are absolutely gorgeous," I admired. Lucia's t-shirt stopped about mid-thigh and really highlighted her naked legs. She smiled and sat cross-legged next to me as I poured her a cup of coffee. She traded her phone for the cup. There was a text from Mama, "Dinner at 6, no late." "A dinner invitation," I commented. "A summons," Lucia corrected, with a bit laughter. "I would love to," I said joyfully. Lucia leaned forward, rat's nest and all, and kissed me. Mama was everything to Lucia, so Mama was very important to me. I wondered how my life would have been different if my parents hadn't died so young, or if I had married and had a family of my own. I tossed the thought aside. Lucia was my now and my forever. We spent the day shopping. We picked up tile, glue, grout, tools, and quite a few gallons of paint. We coordinated with a cabinet company to come out the next day to measure the kitchen and bathrooms. Lucia was keeping it all straight in her head. A beautifully efficient brain was operating under all that hair. I told her so, and she just blushed and playfully told me to shut up. She had no idea of her strong organizational skills. I think she fed off my confidence and just kept imagining it was mostly my doing. In the middle of our shopping spree, Lucia's phone rang. It was Sophia, and Lucia's face lit up as she sat down on a bench outside a home store. I saw Lucia's attention disappear into the phone, and I smiled. I leaned down and kissed her forehead and signaled to meet me inside the store when she was done. Lucia absently acknowledged me with a smile and wave of her hand. No matter how much we meant to each other, I would be second fiddle to her daughter. I could live and die with that. I was in the lighting aisle trying to choose ceiling fixtures when Lucia returned with a bounce in her step. I don't think she realized she had been on the phone for over 45 minutes. "What do you think for the entry hall?" I asked, holding up an enclosed glass fixture with brass trim. Lucia looked for a moment, and I could almost see her brain trying to imagine it in the small entryway. I think indirect would be better, Lucia reflected. It would be warmer and more friendly. She was right, of course. Something without visible bulbs would be nicer. We spent some time and chose a light for the entryway and 2 externals for the porch. She wanted to shop elsewhere for the other rooms since nothing jumped out as perfect. I haven't told Sophia about you yet, Lucia admitted while we waited in line to check out. She was leaning into me, comfortably. I thought about it for a moment. I wondered why that didn't bother me. I would be just a blip to Sophia, a hello and then a goodbye. You shouldn't, I stated. After a short pause, she has enough to worry about in life. The only thing I could offer Sophia was pain. Possibly anger if she resented my selfishness with her mother. It was best for her and Lucia if we never met. It won't bother you? Lucia asked with concern. She almost looked like she was the one with the short lifespan. I smiled at her loving balancing act. Sophia on one side and me on the other. It would cause her nothing but pain, I said carefully. I never want to be the cause of that. I have already been too selfish with you. Lucia welled up a bit and hugged me close, almost knocking me into a battery display. I love you, Lucia whispered. It hurt when she said it. I had already known it, but having it out there in the open was both joyous and chastising. I had linked her to my demise. I was going to cause her tremendous pain, and I was way too weak to let her go. I needed her more than the house. I needed her more than another 50 years. I love you too, I whispered back. An interrupting cough from the cashier broke our kiss. We were holding up the line. The hot water heater was man's greatest invention. It allowed me to linger in the shower with Lucia. Washing her was an absolute delight. I spent time washing her hair, something she enjoyed very much. The experience wound her up tightly, and she forced me, laughing, to lie down in the tub. It was slippery, uncomfortable, and so very wonderful when she lowered herself onto me. It was blissfully slow, her grinding into me as warm water caressed us both. I was her prisoner, trapped between the tub's sides and unable to move. She seemed to like the control and teased me as she took her pleasure. I followed her to the clouds, only seconds after her tremors incited me. I made a mental note to replace the old tub with a wider one. Mama was waiting at the door when we arrived. We had to park in the street since there were already 2 cars in the driveway. I knew one belonged to Dr. Collins. Lucia had said he would be here. I knew why and I didn't hold it against her. This was something I couldn't stop and I knew it was necessary. Mama was smiling when she embraced me. I felt her love as she held me and told me she was glad I was here. It surprised me, after what I was subjecting her daughter to. I was expecting a colder reception. I returned it in kind, which seemed to please Mama and her daughter, which, in turn, pleased me. I wasn't used to that type of greeting. It seemed foreign in some way. Once inside, I saw Dr. Collins and what looked like a colleague of his. You padding the bill, Doc? I asked good-humoredly. Dr. Collins laughed as he rose. We shook hands. This is Dr. Pierce, a neurologist. Collins introduced me to the 30-something doctor wearing jeans and a polo, all of it designer. Camilla has offered a barter. Collins smiled. Dinner in exchange for consultation. That and the director told us to be here, Pierce stated with a smile, nodding toward Mama. I have much power, Mama said with a sly smile. I guessed working 30 years for the same organization begets benefits not given to the average employee. Mama's dinner was as excellent as that last time. She had prepared steak drizzled with a wonderfully spicy cheese topping, sided with julienne potatoes and lightly seasoned, steamed broccoli. I would have had thirds again, but someone had invited 2 hungry doctors. I felt a bit jealous when Mama served them seconds. I was selfish that way. Over coffee, the inevitable conversation began. I had heard it all before and really didn't relish a rehash. Dr. Collins was the first to spot my reluctance. He, of course, was used to these conversations. Can we take this to the front room? Collins asked, looking at Mama. She looked at me and nodded. Lucia was looking a little confused. I've heard it before, I said quietly to Lucia. We'll talk after. She saw my apprehension and kissed me on the cheek. Everyone but Mama picked up their coffees and headed to the front room. Do you know how to do dishes? Mama asked. She knew enough to take my mind off the conversation. I stood and started collecting plates. Of course, I replied with a smile. Mama went to set up the sink as I collected the dishes and silverware. "She need to know," Mama said, handing me a freshly washed plate to dry. I ran a towel across its base and around the rim. "I know," I replied. "It's just not a fun conversation." Mama nodded while handing me another dish. "We be there when God call," Mama said clearly. The word "we" struck hard. Now I've dragged two people into my private cesspool. I didn't mean to suck her into this. I looked at her as she dipped another plate in the soapy water. I didn't. Mama cut me off with her hand. "Lucia make her choice," Mama clarified. "Jew family now." I tried to say something, anything, but nothing came out. I just stared at her, dumbfounded. This wasn't my choice to make. It never was. I had dug my hole too deep. "Lucia love you. She not dancing. I see dreams in eyes." Mama was tearing up. "I sorry. I know can help what God do." She shrugged her shoulders helplessly. "I know we want you here." I stood there, like an idiot, just staring at her. How could she even think I was anything but a problem? "That house thing," Mama continued, talking with her hands, "that all she talk about. How'd you two do this and that? How'd you're building something? She not thought that way since Sophia born. Now she happy. Jew do that." Mama grabbed my arms with her wet hands. "She need Jew, even if it a little while. I think Jew need Lucia too." I wrapped my arms around her. "More than you will ever know," I whispered. I had only considered how bad I was for Lucia. I didn't know her before to see how she had changed. "It will be hard later," I reminded Mama. "Jew just love Lucia. The family deal with after," Mama said, and returned to the dishes after wiping her eyes. "That what families do," she added. It struck me then, looking at Lucia's mom, there were steps I could take to guarantee Lucia would have choices. A future of her own choosing, beyond the transient me. I would never see a dime of social security, but Lucia might collect. I smiled at the thought. I was adding up the unspent portions of my 401k in my head. The value of the house, the stock in the brokerage firm, and the cash still in the bank all made a pretty healthy sum. There's no point in a cousin I hadn't seen in 20 years getting it. "Lucia needs to marry me," I said, smiling. Mama looked up at my face with her own sly grin. She had thought the same thing. From anyone else I would have thought it nefarious. With Mama, it was calculated love. An obvious solution for maintaining a path for Lucia. Mama's wet hands grabbed my cheeks and she kissed me on the lips. "Jew make wonderful son," Mama stated with sincerity. "You are a wonderful mother," I said conspiratorially. Mama smiled as we returned to the dishes. It's funny how a few thoughts can change one's mood. I went from trepidation to euphoria in a matter of moments. I always knew I would give Lucia the house. I was just slow to see the rest. Suddenly, money had value again. I was putting up the last of dishes while Mama was telling me young Lucia stories. I got the picture of a fairly wild girl with little fear. She must have been a terror to raise, but Mama remembered those times fondly. I guess that was the spark Mama saw now. The lack of fear and the certainty of being correct. Lucia had basically taken over the rehab, at least in spirit. Her decisions were now steering the project and setting the timeline. Mama had her daughter back. I was going to ensure Mama could keep her. I was laughing at one of the stories when Lucia came into the kitchen. She looked at Mama and said something unspoken. Mama just stood up, kissed her, and left the room. Lucia straddled me in the chair, her hands behind my neck. "You won't fight it?" Lucia asked. The doctors must have told her about the Chancy treatments. I had dropped those ideas quickly. The odds were lottery-sized and meant spending most of my time sick in a hospital bed. Not my vision of end of life. "No," I said simply. "Dr. Pierce agrees with you," Lucia said as her eyes got cloudy. "The headache part scares me. They said it would be painful." I couldn't help her much with that. "I will get through it." "I have to," I said simply. "We will get through it," Lucia reiterated. "Because we have to." She leaned in closely to my ear and whispered, "Dr. Pierce seemed to think sex might help. Whatever Dr. Pierce charged for his services, it wasn't nearly enough. He did not." I smiled. "Well, I did ask, and he said it couldn't hurt," Lucia said with her $1,000,000 smile. Her face went serious again. "It's better that I know. Thank you for letting me know." I kissed her then. She was right. It was better there wouldn't be any surprises. Nothing I had to hopelessly try to hide. The Harvest Festival occurred that weekend. I had never been to one, and since Diana had guilted me into going, I dragged Lucia with me. She was apprehensive. Her history with the town was skewed by her high school pregnancy and previous employment. She had been avoiding events like the festival since high school. Watching Lucia deal with contractors, you would never think she had a self-conscious bone in her body. Here, at the festival, she was constantly adjusting her skirt and fixing her hair. "Lucia," a red-haired woman with way too many freckles called out. She was waving from inside a funnel cake booth. Lucia's face turned red and she waved back with a weak smile. "Who's that?" I asked. "Kathy. We were friends in high school," Lucia said quickly, trying to steer me away. I stopped in my tracks. "So, introduce me." I smiled. Here was a woman willing to watch me die, and she was afraid of the past. Lucia was uneasy with the request. She looked up to me with pleading eyes. "Things got kind of embarrassing after Sophia was born," Lucia whispered. "I lost most of my friends, dropped out. I don't really want to relive it." I caressed her hand in mine and just nodded my head. I didn't have the heart to force her to attack those demons. This demon thought otherwise. "Lou, aren't you going to say hi?" Kathy had sneaked up behind us. Her question sounded sad. Lucia turned and tried to stutter an apology. They stood there looking at each other for a moment, and then Kathy teared up and hugged Lucia. Lucia followed suit and I was suddenly the third wheel. A series of half-sentences followed that seemed nonsensical, but obviously quite clear to the both of them. "Come on, Lou. We're short-handed," Kathy said, pulling Lucia along. "We can talk while we work." I followed behind a very happy Lucia who had forgotten I existed. By the time we were at the booth, talk of children came up and mouths were moving at a mile a minute. Kathy gave Lucia a children's charity apron, and, without thinking, Lucia was working the booth. I felt a tap on my shoulder and turned to see a well-groomed man, also dressed in an apron, with metal glasses smiling at me. He held out his hand. "Bob," he said quickly, "looks like you've been drafted too." "Todd," I answered and shook his hand. He handed me an apron and taught me the finer points of frying funnel cakes. Bob was Kathy's husband. They had 2 kids, one just starting high school, a house in town, and ran a small accounting practice. I received half the information from Bob and gleaned the other half from the nonstop conversation between Kathy and Lucia. People they both knew came by the booth and talked about old times, the teachers they had once tortured and the fun they had. Lucia was glowing. Mama drifted by the booth, unnoticed by the chattering Lucia. She came up the side, near the fryer, and smiled at me. "See, that what you do for her," Mama said proudly. I smiled back, glancing at Lucia who was in her own personal heaven. I flipped over the current cake I was making and looked back. Mama was gone. I guess she knew better than to stick around. There was always work to do at a charity booth. The whole town seemed to eventually pass by the booth. Lucia's unwarranted embarrassment disappeared that afternoon. It was a small town, and everyone knew everyone else's dirty laundry. Getting pregnant in high school 20 years ago was no longer at the top of anyone's bad list. In fact, most of the people were generally interested in what Sophia was up to. Luckily, it happened to be Lucia's favorite subject. It was the most I had seen Lucia laugh since I had known her. It was near dinner time when we were relieved by other volunteers. Lucia finally introduced me to Kathy, who was a good hugger. We all promised to get together in the future and separated cordially with Bob's undying thanks for our help. Lucia was no longer concerned about her skirt, or if her hair was askew. I loved to see her with a perpetual smile, nodding at passers-by and trading hellos. Now others could see her as I did. "Where would like to eat?" Lucia queried, turning to me. I smiled and shrugged my shoulders. Lucia lost her smile. "How long?" she asked compassionately. I didn't think my headache was that obvious. "Not long," I lied. "It started about 2 hours ago and had increased in intensity. Nothing I couldn't handle. Certainly not worth interrupting Lucia's joy." "Keys," Lucia ordered, holding out her hand. "Come on, we're having fun." I smiled, trying to downplay the headache. Lucia just flexed her fingers, still demanding the keys. I sighed and gave them to her, and we headed to the car. Lucia had me lay my head in her lap as she drove. She had one warm hand over my eyes to help block out the light. It was wonderfully relaxing and lessened the pain. She talked quietly, telling me about all the people she had run into and how they connected to her past. Her voice was always just one hair above a whisper. It never irritated the headache and was soothing to listen to. Nothing she said required a response. I just had to lie there and try to calm my brain. The ugly curtains Lucia had hung in the bedroom now made sense. She closed them and the late-day sun was completely blocked out. The room became a soothing darkness. She had been preparing for this. She pulled back the blankets and had me lie on the cool sheets. She removed my shoes, then hers, and lay next to me. You really don't realize how powerful love is until someone gives you all of hers. We simply held each other for hours as my head complained. Lucia didn't fuss and didn't cry. She was simply there with me to make sure I wasn't alone and all was quiet. Sometimes love means doing nothing. We spent the next day tiling the kitchen floor. We had watched YouTube instructions and read a few pamphlets from the store. We solved the debate about whether to lay the cabinets directly on the plywood or on top of the tile. It seems cabinet companies prefer the first option and tile layers normally choose the latter. We chose the latter since it meant less tile cutting. It also meant the floor had to be very level since shimming the cabinets on top of tile would be sloppy. All the videos and reading in the world would not have prepared us for what we had undertaken. There is a reason professionals get paid well to lay tile. No one ever told us to prepare for crooked walls. It looked like the corner was 90 degrees. You had a right to assume it was 90 degrees, but it wasn't. The corner was a little less than perfect. We made the mistake of laying tile along the short wall first. We realized this would cause the error to run along the whole long wall, giving the tiles a crooked look. We ended up tearing out the initial run of tiles. Lucia took it well and rallied into the afternoon. I was more frustrated with the mistake and the time we had wasted. A few kisses and some good-natured teasing got me back on track. That, and she looked really good bent over in those jeans. We were finishing the part that would be covered by the new cabinets when I asked Lucia to marry me. For some reason, it didn't make sense to get all romantic about it. If it wasn't for my time constraints, I would have waited several months and spent days planning before asking. I want us to get married, I said conversationally. It sounded kind of ridiculous coming out of my mouth. More of a business relationship than a proposal. It wasn't even a question. What for? Lucia asked as she leaned on a newly placed tile to seat the glue. You don't need a piece of paper. I'm not going anywhere, Todd. She, of course, misunderstood my feeble intent. She wasn't angry. It just seemed a waste of time to her. I was already on my knees, so I attempted to rephrase. Lucia, will you marry me? I asked in all seriousness. She looked over and laughed. It wasn't an insulting laugh. She had assumed I was joking. Her humor petered out when she saw my expression didn't change. Todd, are you afraid I am going to leave you? Lucia asked with concern on her voice. After last night, that was the furthest thought from my mind. I had obviously bungled the delivery. I'm worried about when I leave you, I informed her. I want to leave you all this. I gestured to the house. I can give you choices. I can sort of be there after. I let it trail off, unable to say the obvious. I can admit it to myself, but I still have trouble saying it out loud. Lucia's eyes got all glassy. I am here for you. Not for this, Lucia responded, holding up a tile. She was taking it all wrong. I almost sensed she felt insulted. I know, I stated clearly. I'm saying it all wrong. I am certainly not trying to buy what you have freely given. I wouldn't want it that way. I shook my head trying to find the words. I closed my eyes and began again. If there was time, if I had met you sooner, I imagine us as a family, you, me, Sophia and her brothers and sisters. I would have had plans in place. I would never have left you destitute. I opened my eyes and looked at hers. I want to be part of your future, any way I can. Lucia choked up a bit. How many kids? Lucia asked with a little sniffle. She had her own dreams. 3 or 4 plus, Sophia, I answered. My impossible dreams were greedy. I saw a tear start down Lucia's cheek. She tackled me, smothering me in kisses and dripping a few tears. She felt so good in my arms as I tried desperately not to move the newly set tiles beneath me. It would have been such a wonderful family, Lucia said. Marry me. Let me take care of my family, I whispered in her ear. Lucia nodded and hugged me tighter. I felt some of the tiles shift and I realized I didn't care if I had to redo the entire kitchen. Lucia had said yes. It took us a few more hours to finish the tiles. Impending death has a way of changing priorities. I took Lucia out to dinner to celebrate the kitchen floor, not our impending nuptials. The marriage seemed more like a legal formality, which I guess it was since a future life together was just not going to happen. I offered for Lucia's sake. Lucia accepted for my sake, and possibly for Sophia's. Love has a way of crisscrossing our reasoning. How am I going to tell Mama? Lucia asked after we ordered. Rusty's was pretty busy, so I had ordered my pie early. They had run out one night, and I wasn't going to let that happen again. Someone else would have to be disappointed tonight. She already gave me her blessing, I replied. I was sitting high in my seat, trying to see if anyone was securing my pie from the glass display cabinet. Diana was hovering near the display, but not actively slicing. You asked her permission? Lucia inquired with a huge smile. I responded. I wondered if it would be rude to ask Diana to get the slice now. I ordered it, but maybe she thought to wait until after we finished eating. I knew it was a risk to wait, having lost that gamble once before. Is there heroin in those things? Lucia asked. I answered, not really listening anymore. One of the other waitresses pulled out what might be the last pie and cut a slice. I had to rate the risk of embarrassment against the lack of pie. It's not like I had a normal lifetime to eat pie. Every missed opportunity was lost forever. I was just about to speak to Diana when Lucia suddenly got up and went over to the display. She returned a moment later with a whole pie and wearing a smile. I was sure my relief was visible on my face. You asked her permission? Lucia inquired again. Realizing she had asked about Mama earlier finally registered in my brain. I smiled with apologetic eyes. I talked to her about it after dinner. When you were with the doctors, I answered properly. She said I would make a wonderful son. Lucia was beaming. How did you know I wanted the pie? I asked. She leaned over and kissed me. Because I will make a wonderful wife, Lucia replied. You talked to Mama, she repeated with an incredulous, glowing smile. I guessed it was the right thing to do. I had a happy fiancé and my own pie. Life was good. We were married a week later. It was a very small ceremony at the courthouse, presided over by a very fat judge. He was jovial and seemed to get a kick out of marrying us. I guess listening to people arguing all day makes you thankful to deal with two parties who are in total agreement. He used pleasantly casual words, but made us say our I do's. It was witnessed by Mama, Dr. Collins, Dr. Pierce, and Bob and Kathy Thompson. Bob and Kathy were made aware of the whole situation, which I really disliked sharing. My lawyer recommended we have multiple disinterested witnesses to avoid any legal challenges from long-lost relatives. It took a few minutes for Bob and Kathy to get past the pity. They promised to keep the secret so the whole town didn't become a pity party. During the ceremony, Kathy cried a little, which made Lucia cry, followed quickly by Mama. I was just thankful they were happy tears. We brought everyone to our house. During the week, we were able to complete the kitchen and the downstairs bath. Mama, Kathy, and Lucia took over the kitchen, and the guys set up folding tables in the unfinished future dining room. I broke out the beer, turned on some music, and we celebrated. Dr. Pierce admitted he was freeloading. He understood Mama would be involved in cooking dinner and decided to tag along with Dr. Collins. I smiled, completely understanding life as a bachelor, having spent all but half a day as one. Bob stated loudly that I needed a belated bachelor party. Too late, Lucia yelled from the kitchen. I laughed at her bullet-like response. Bob just wants a reason to see strippers, Kathy chided loudly. I went silent, realizing they probably didn't know how I met Lucia. I was hoping Lucia wasn't feeling uncomfortable with the comment. I wondered how Mama was taking it. That how Todd meet Lucia, Mama said. I was shocked to hear it coming so clearly from the kitchen. The two doctors just sipped their beer. I sensed they already knew. Bob's eyes went wide and he looked at me. I gave him a half smile and shrugged my shoulders. She danced to put Sophia in college, Mama clarified proudly. I heard nothing from Lucia, so I went to check on her. Lucia and Kathy were hugging when I entered. I guess it was a mix of sympathy, forgiveness, and love on both sides. I raised my beer to the dining room. Here's to mothers, I toasted, and the children they love. A chorus of here, here, was returned. Lucia looked up and smiled. Mama looked at me and nodded. There, all dirty laundry out, Mama stated. Life go on. I had to admire her boldness. Lucia didn't have to hide her past anymore. Kathy certainly wasn't holding it against her. Bob seemed impressed I had married a stripper, and the two doctors got a free meal. Mama's timing was perfect. The dinner, of course, was amazing. Mama and the ladies made thick chicken chimichangas topped with a piquant avocado mix. This time I had thirds since they had made plenty. Mama had definitely missed her calling. I had no idea how Lucia had stayed trim growing up with her mama's cooking. I would have weighed 500 pounds and been very happy. The doctors spent a good 15 minutes singing Mama's accolades. Mama just smiled, soaking up the praise. I don't feel any different, Lucia called from the bathroom later, after everyone had left. Feeling no pain, having had my share of beer, I wondered if I had made the marriage too functional. Are you sorry we didn't do the whole white dress thing? I asked. With the time constraints and the desire to keep it private, it hadn't seemed prudent. I just didn't want her to regret it. Lucia responded no. She rounded the corner in nothing but her smile. You would just rip it off me anyway. My wife, standing in the doorway, was the most beautiful naked angel this side of heaven. I stood, walked over and kissed her. She laughed. Brush your teeth, beer breath, Lucia said kindly. Then come back and make love to me like a good husband. She ran her hand up my thigh to emphasize her point. At your command, my wife. I joked as I spun into the bathroom and quickly brushed the barley and hops from my mouth. I left my clothes in a neat pile on the floor next to Lucia's and entered the bedroom like a Greek god. I loved the smile my strutting caused. I could see she was trying desperately not to laugh. Come here, stud, Lucia called. She held out her hand to try to speed my ridiculous walk. I lay next to her and looked into her eyes. I'm glad I married you, I said sincerely. I ran my hand through her hair, combing it back from her face. And I, you, Lucia replied. We kissed then, slowly and deeply. Something was different. It was just a stupid piece of paper, but something was different. I rolled on top of my wife, kissing her neck and absently playing with her jugs. Now my jugs, too. She was mine and I was hers. My movements were slight, almost a rocking motion. I wanted the first married time to last, and she did nothing to hurry it along. We stayed, conjoined, staring into each other's eyes with no doubts about how we felt. I felt her arms tighten around my neck as she pulled me closer. I held her, staying with her as she slowly came down from the clouds. It was all very sensual and indescribably private, intense on a different level. Something had changed. I feel different, Lucia sighed. A better different, she clarified as she kissed me. You do make a wonderful wife, I said, trying to catch my breath, and that was a hell of a lot better than pie. Lucia laughed lightly, and we kissed some more. Then we kissed again, and again. The weeks traveled by in a fog of euphoria. We spent our days completing the bathroom and its two new siblings. The tub was especially large, and we tested its breadth a couple of times. My wife was amorous, and I fed off her desire. When no deliveries or guests were expected, Lucia made it a point to be braless. She teased me mercilessly, always bending over at just the right angle. Our honeymoon was spent installing hardwood flooring on the first floor. I was working hard on pounding in a stubborn slat when Lucia entered wearing a short skirt and knee pads. The skirt was cute, but completely inappropriate for the work at hand. I gave her a questioning look. She just giggled and got down to work. It was 2 hours before we returned to the flooring. The inevitable returned as we were painting the dining room. I was up on a ladder, trying to carefully edge a light blue color along the wall without marring the ceiling. I was inwardly proud at my steady hand, not needing a guide to shield the ceiling anymore. The headache came quickly, unlike the previous ones. It went from a dull ache to a blinding pain in a matter of seconds. I stumbled off the ladder and landed on my backside, cringing, my eyes closed. It felt like someone had driven a hot poker into my skull. Lucia was at my side immediately. She relieved me of the paintbrush and got me to stand. "I have you," Lucia whispered. This one was much worse than before. I knew she could see it, even as I tried to open my eyes and relieve her worry. The light was blinding and seared into my brain. I had to close my eyes or give up standing. She guided me upstairs to the dark sanctuary and laid me on the bed. My jaw hurt, and I realized I was grinding my teeth. I had expected pain, but I hadn't expected the agony I was feeling now. "You need the pills," Lucia said quietly. I could hear the desperation in her voice. This was hurting her also. I shook my head, not wanting my own voice echoing in my skull. I wasn't ready to leave reality. The pain would pass. "Please," she said, and I shook my head again. I wrapped my hands over my ears to shut out what sounds I could. My head was on fire. Lucia curled up next to me, silent. I could feel her heart beating too fast. It was the first time I wished she would leave me. I could suffer through my pain, but I had trouble suffering through hers. Sometime later, time was moving strangely. I felt her rise. I was thankful when I heard the door quietly close, and I was left with only my broiling brain. She should be spared this. Everyone should be spared this. Lucia quietly returned later. The pain had not lessened, and I had failed to come to terms with it. It was not something I could ignore, although I continued to try. "You have to eat. Dr. Pierce said it would ease the pain," Lucia lied. Although I didn't know it then. It was oatmeal she handed me, mixed with cinnamon. I ate with my eyes closed. Even the swallowing seemed to ignite the fire. I ate in desperation, hoping it would dull the sharp edges of the knife that seared into my skull. In time, it did. The pain began to fade, but my muscles went limp with it. I opened my eyes lethargically and saw my wife in tears. "I am sorry," Lucia whimpered. "I am sorry," she repeated as tears flowed down her cheeks. I knew then that I had just had my pills. I reached out to her, trying to comfort her, to tell her it was all right. My muscles didn't want to cooperate as my head sank deeper into the pillow. The world took on a glossy hue with no detail. My wife, in all her beauty, seemed so far away. "It's okay," I slurred. I closed my eyes because it took too much strength to hold them open. I could still feel the pain, but it was more like a memory than anything too disconcerting. I faded to sleep. I awoke about a century later. My thoughts were foggy, but the pain was gone. It would be back, of that I was certain. When I opened my eyes, Lucia was sleeping fitfully next to me. She was still in her painting clothes, and there were dark circles around her lovely eyes. My muscles were mine again, although they still tried to fight back. I leaned over and kissed my wife's cheek. It startled her awake. "Is it gone?" Lucia asked with bloodshot eyes. I nodded and gave her a weak smile. "I'm sorry I tricked you," she said as her eyes began to water. I couldn't watch it anymore. I caressed her cheek and saw the pain that loving me could cause. "You're in charge of the pills." I surrendered completely to Lucia. "I'll take them whenever you tell me to." The pain I had seen in her face was worse than the migraine. My wife came first. Reality came second. She kissed me tenderly and we just lay there, talking about nothing important, simply enjoying being with each other another day. There were 3 things that made my wife happy. Sex, me bonding with her mama, and shopping. Lucia loved picking out furniture. The first floor was complete, and it was time to add guts to the newly designed skin. Her eyes were glowing as we went from store to store. She had a notebook full of primary and secondary choices, as well as managing the budgetary concerns. My mind was completely jumbled with a myriad of choices by the time we had visited the last store. Lucia looked at her notes and smiled. I knew the look. I had seen it on the Discovery Channel. The same look a female lion would get when she stalked her prey. We backtracked through the stores, purchasing with acuity. I had no idea how all this would fit together, but I trusted her confidence and loved her enthusiasm. By the end of the week, the first floor looked like a home. There were only the 4 bedrooms left to do, and I was living on pills every 4 days or so. Lucia had completely moved into the house. We had one unfinished bedroom filled with her eclectic furniture from her old apartment. Mama began visiting regularly, sitting with me. Once I awoke from a pill-induced sleep to see her keeping vigil. Lucia was determined to finish the house. It had at one time been my dream, and I didn't have the heart to tell her she had replaced that dream. It made her so happy to work toward my dream's completion, and I loved to see her happy. I began sleeping longer. It concerned Lucia greatly. She knew what it meant, and I saw it in her eyes. My time was growing shorter. Mama had temporarily moved into one of the spare rooms as soon as it was finished. She saw the signs and was determined to see Lucia through. I spent long hours talking with Mama when Lucia was busy elsewhere. We talked about my wife, my end, and making sure it wasn't Lucia's end. I loved Mama's strength. I didn't really believe in God, but she certainly did. She was adamant I was going to heaven, which I found strangely comforting even though I didn't believe the place existed. I awoke one day, barely able to move. My eyelids opened like anvils. My breathing was shallow, and I couldn't seem to take in more air. I had trouble focusing on Mama, who sat in a chair beside the bed. She rose quickly, seeing me awake. She leaned down and kissed my forehead, and I felt a tear hit my cheek. "God coming, my son," Mama stuttered. "I get your wife." I knew it was the truth and was thankful I was to be spared any more pain. My eyes wanted to close, but I forced them to stay open with what little I had left. I wanted to see my wife one more time. Lucia ran in, covered in splotches of light green paint. She quickly lay down next to me, and I could see the red in her eyes. Mama left and closed the door. "It's almost done. Just another day," Lucia pleaded. When my eyes next closed again, they would never reopen. I smiled as best I could. "It's okay," I said softly. "It's okay," I repeated. How things had changed since we first met. Lucia hugged me and started to cry. There was nothing I could do about her pain. I knew this day would come, and I had dug the hole so horribly deep. "Thank you for being my wife," I whispered. She raised her tear-stained face and looked me in the eyes. I was mesmerized by that angelic face as my eyes closed. Her lips took me into darkness. The spring weather was giving way to summer's warmth. Lucia and her mother, Camilla, were dressed conservatively and sat in the front row on the lawn. Hundreds of white folding chairs were in neat, orderly rows and filled with well-dressed parents, grandparents, and friends. No one more proud than Lucia. The stage was only a foot off the ground, just enough elevation to set it apart from the immaculate grounds of the relatively small university. The chancellor was giving a dry speech about the past and the new future represented by the graduates they were about to present. His robes were ostentatious with many long ribbons of various colors running down the front. Lucia had no idea what they signified, but smiled thinking they might be self-installed. "All our graduates are stars in their own right," the chancellor droned on. "But one always seems to shine brightest. It is with great pleasure that I introduce you to your valedictorian, Sofia Mendez." Pride blanketed Lucia's face as her daughter took the podium. Camilla grabbed her daughter's hand and smiled as her granddaughter took the podium. Sofia had the same thick raven hair as her grandmother and mother. The same smile adorned her lips, but her eyes were more intense, inherited from a father she would never meet and never desired to meet. Sofia looked down from the stage and found her mother's eyes. She smiled, and her mother beamed her love back to her. Sofia's mother had talked with her last night. Sofia had seen the changes in her mother and watched her new property management business prosper from afar. She had sensed an underlying sadness and had gleaned parts of the story her mother had refused to tell. Last night, she learned it all and cried. She cried for never having met Todd, the man who gave her mother a future and secured her own dreams as well. She mostly cried for her mother because the love she found had left too soon. Sofia's speech was the typical fare given by valedictorians. It spoke of accomplishments and goals. It was littered with humorous anecdotes only the graduates seemed to understand and appreciate. It was well received and not overly long. Both Lucia and Camilla were at the edge of their seats trying to memorize the moment. Near the end, Sofia shifted to thanking the school, faculty, and everyone else who helped make it possible. "My friends," Sofia paused. "We can't forget our friends who helped make this journey possible and more enjoyable. I thank all of you, especially you, Tammy." She swept her hand over the black-cloaked graduates sitting on the left side. "Our families," she paused again and looked at her mother and grandmother. "Thank you, Grandmama." Lucia felt a tear run down her cheek as Sophia's eyes found hers. "Thank you, Mama." Sophia pushed her written speech aside and felt her eyes water. She really tried hard not to let it get in her voice. "I also have to thank my father," Sophia said softly. Lucia's tears flowed freely. "Not my biological father who left my mother to raise me alone. I speak of the man who loved my mother, the one who gave her her dreams back, the one who guaranteed I could achieve mine, the one I regretfully will never meet since God took him before I could." Sophia's voice cracked as she looked up to the blue sky. "Thank you, Dad." Sophia left the podium before tears overwhelmed her like they had her mother. The crowd applauded and the graduates cheered. Both had sensed the sorrow. Lucia was trying to hold herself together and failed. Too many emotions, pride, loss, and love flowed through her in waves. "I just wish I could have finished the house in time," Lucia whimpered. She deeply regretted not fulfilling Todd's dream while he was alive. Telling Sophia helped, but the pain was still fresh. 2 years had barely begun to dull it. Camilla just smiled at her daughter and pulled her close. "Baby, he no care about house," Camilla said softly. "He dream about fixing Jew." Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comment section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.